Hello and welcome back to Web Design for Small Business. In this video, part 12, PHP Fundamentals, we're going to be going over the basics of the PHP programming language, some general do's and don'ts, and then we're going to go ahead and create a login page, which is the page that our login form submits to. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to open up our NetBeans, and just reviewing our index.php, we created a form that submits to the login.php file and submits the login name and login pass variables. Okay, so we're going to open up our login.php page. And note that it has nothing in it because we deleted everything. So the first thing we're going to do is write our PHP tag. So less than $PHP, and then give it a few blank lines and do a question mark and greater than sign. And this is our PHP tag. All of our PHP will be included in the middle of that. Okay, so some basics with PHP. It is a programming language, so it's a series of different variables, if-then statements, math, strings versus arrays, and functions, constants, a lot of different things working together to do something. So we're going to start off with a string. So in order to write a variable, it starts with the $sign and then text following that. It's good practice to always have the string start with a lowercase letter and then whatever you want from there. So I'm going to create one called test. So this is our basic variable. Now we use the equal sign to tell the script what value to assign to that variable. And if you want it to be a string, it would be in quotation marks. Now you can use single quotes or double quotes, it doesn't matter. Specifically, if you want it to be a string, I recommend using the single quotes. If you use double quotes, it can evaluate the data that is in between, whereas single quotes forces a string. So single quotes for string to keep it simple. This is a test script. Okay, so basically this $test is the name of our variable, and the value assigned to it is the text. This is a test script. Now you can also do ones like test num. Notice I'm using camel caps. It just simplifies the process. And I'm going to create the number 1. Test number is equal to 1. Okay, so the difference between these two, this one here is technically a string with a value of 1 as the string. This, however, is evaluated as an integer. So it's an actual number, and the number is 1. The difference between these two is that if you add this to something, it will literally just add the number 1, whereas if you add this to something, it will actually increment by 1. So for example, if I went and did some math, so test val is equal to 2 plus test number, semicolon. Remember that each line has to end with a semicolon. I could put these all in the same row and it would work. Again, the spaces, the enters, all that is just white space. What delineates that it's a new line, thus a new piece of code, is that semicolon. So this would actually, the value of test val would be 3. Now if I change this from test number to test num, the value of this would be 21, because it would literally just take that 1 and add it to that. It might actually recognize that this is a number and do it properly, or it could break entirely because it doesn't want to add anything to that. It wants you to connect them, which if you're going to connect two strings, so for example, if I wanted, this is a test script dot 1, basically what you would do is test dot test num, and that would add those two together, basically saying this is a test script dot, and then 1 would show up like that right after it. Now a way to actually get it to show this, there are a couple ways. One, you can do a print, so it would print to the screen, or the more common way is by echoing it. So if I go echo test and I save that, if I go into my web page here and I go to login.php, this is a test script. So the echo just outputted that text. So if I change this to test val, save that, refresh, you note that it adds the 1. So if I did test num plus test number, save, it does convert this from a string to an integer, add the 2 digits together. If I change that plus to a dot, save, run, it becomes 11 because it adds the 2 as strings. Now if you want to know what exactly that is, instead of doing an echo, you can do a var dump, or a variable dump. And that looks like that with brackets. So we take our value and dump it in there, and then it gives us a bit more information. So we save that, refresh. So it gives us where the page is located on our server, the line number, that it's a string of 11, and it has a length of 2, meaning 2 characters. Now if I change this back to plus, save that, refresh, it now tells me that it is an integer, and the integer value is 2. So that is your basic string. Now I'm going to talk about arrays. So an array is a series of strings. Separated by commas. This is another script. So now if I dump that, you see I get an array, size 2, 0, because they always start with 0, not 1. And it's a string. This is a test script, 22 character length, and the second field, number 1, string, this is another script, length 23. Now if I were to change that from a var dump, and an easy way to get rid of that without having to delete it is I comment it out, and I'm going to echo test. And it just says array. That's important to note because if it's a string, it will print the string, but if it's an array, it won't give you any of the values, it just prints out that array. So how do we get it to tell us what's in that array? Well, this is basically a basic array, so it numbers them automatically. Now, so this is what is known as an indexed array, where it's just a set separated by commas of different values with no keys. So the keys are automatically generated and they're numbered starting with 0. If we wanted to give them values, we would we would have to enter it like this. Key 1, comma, key 2, so basically they're still separated by commas, but you have a key. Also note that each one is still in quotations. And then you have an equal then, and then a greater than sign, which kind of makes it look like an arrow. So this is the key, this is the value, this is the second key, this is the second value. If we save that, I'm actually going to comment or uncomment that out so we get both of them. Refresh that. So the string still shows array, but the first one, the var dump, now shows us key 1 is a string, key 2 is a string. So instead of showing us 0 and 1, it now says key 1 and key 2. So if we want to show what is in that, what we do is we use the square brackets and we write in the number. So if we were still using the simple indexed array, we would just enter the number. So test 0, but because we changed that to an indexed array, now we have to write the key. And because it's a string, we still use the single quotes. And we would type in key 1. So test in the square brackets, key 1 with single quotes. Save that, refresh, and now you get this is a test script. So we're going to change this back so that it's a simple indexed array. So this would then be 0, and we're going to create a simple if-then statement. So if test is equal to this is a test script, then echo test works. Else echo test failed. Okay, so to break this down, this is a simple if-then statement. So you have the word if, then you have parentheses, and in the parentheses you have what you're asking. This is the actual question. So is the variable test equal to, and you note that equal to is a set of double equal signs, two equal signs. Is this a test script? And then in curly braces, we have what to do if it works. So if that is evaluated to a yes or the Boolean true, then do this. So it will echo test works. Else, so if this fails or is equal to a Boolean of false, then echo test failed instead. So save that out and refresh. Test failed. The reason for that is because we used test, which we know would actually equal to array. So we need to change this to test 0. Okay. Test works. Now if we change this to test 1 and save that, it should be this is another script, not this is a test script, so this should now fail. Test failed. So you see how that works. Now if we were to go with something slightly different, we can, instead of using an array, that's t1, or test variable 1, is equal to 1, t2 is equal to 2, and we're going to do some math. So here, if t1 is less than t2, then do that. And again, it should be. So test works. Now this says null. Why does that say null? Because it's dumping the variable test, which does not exist. So if it does not exist, it gives null, which is equal to 0. And this echo test 0, which test 0 doesn't exist, so it will echo nothing. And that's why we get nothing. And it will actually show up on this line here. And that was our var dump. So we can comment that out, comment that out. Now if we went greater than, test failed. And you notice we didn't have anything else because I commented those out, so this is the only output that we have on the page. Okay. So that's kind of your basic if-then statements. We can get into more complex ones, but for now, that's kind of what we need to look at. Oh, I guess one other thing we can do is if 1 is equal to 1, so if t1 is equal to t2, then test works. Test works because it knows that 1 and 1 are the same. However, if we want to be very specific, add a third equal sign, and then it forces the context. So this is an integer of 1, this is a string of 1. And this says, is this exactly equal to this? Save that, and test failed, because this is a string of 1 and this is an integer of 1, so those two are not identical. They have different context, so it fails. However, that would still succeed because the double equal doesn't specify the context. Alright, so moving on from variables into functions. So a function is you create by typing the word function, space, the name of the function, my function, and a set of brackets. Within those parentheses, you can type in any code you want. So the next is functions. So for functions, type in the word function, and that creates a new function. Type in the name of your function, and a set of parentheses and a set of curly bracers. Okay, now within, oh, and I didn't mention this with the if-then statements, but when you have a set of curly bracers, and that applies for most of the constructs, like the if-then statements, functions do the same thing. You don't add a semicolon afterwards because you would have to add it at the end of the curly braces. And it's because you can have multiple sets and it's only going to choose one. So instead of having it at the end, you have to include it within each. So something to keep in mind, always have a semicolon unless you're dealing with the curly bracers, in which case it doesn't. Within the my function, you would set variables. So any variables that you would need within the function, separated by commas. So T1 and T2. And then what do? We want T1 plus T2 T3 is set to T1 plus T2, and then return T3. So what this does is when we pass something to my function, it's looking for two variables. We add those two together and then return the result. Very basic function. So then how that would play out is we would go echo number is dot my function test comma var. Okay. So now we need to create test variable, and we need to create a var variable. So test is equal to 1, var is equal to 4. Don't think of this as equals, think of it as set as or set to. So test is set to 1, var is set to 4, equals is always that double set. So what this does is it will echo the string this number is with a space at the end, and then it'll also echo out my function using the variables test and var in the first and second slot. So my function T1 is then set to test. So test becomes T1, var becomes T2, so it adds test and var to get T3, and then it will return T3. So this will then become T3, Save that, refresh. The number is 5. 1 plus 4 is equal to 5. So that's your basic function. As you can see, they can get very complicated if you want them to. The whole purpose of them is if you need to do one process multiple times, you can create a function to do that, so that way you don't have to rewrite that same code multiple times. You just call that function and it does all that work. So it just kind of saves you from having to rewrite code multiple times. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about are constants. So a constant is something that it's a variable that you intend on using multiple times, but you don't want to have to relabel it each time. So it's kind of a variable you set once and then it always maintains that same value. The main case that I can think of where people use constants is when you're working on things like sites with multiple language support. So what you would do is you would create a constant that you would use in the actual page code, and then depending on what the user selected as their language, it would enter different words. So you'd basically have a dictionary for each language that says if they choose this language, then these constants will now have these words as their variables. So for example, you could go define hello that, and then echo hello. Now if I refresh that, what we get is hello with capital H, everything else lowercase. So we set a variable called lang to en, and then if lang is equal to en, then we define hello as hello, else if lang is equal to fr, define hello bonjour. So with the else if, before I showed you we had an if and then an else. So with if and else if, basically it says if this is true, then do it. If this is false, then check this one. If this is false, then go on to the next one, right? So if we had another one after this, if this one were true, it would stop and not do the next one as well. If we didn't have the else and it was just two separate ifs, if they were both true, it would do both. If they were both false, it wouldn't do either. With this one, Like I said, if the first one's true, it won't bother checking the second. If this was just else, we wouldn't need this part, and it would just do, if this is true, then do it. If not, if this is false, then do this as the default, basically. So we save this, and our echo hello should be the exact same. Refresh, still hello. Now if we change this language at the top to FR, save, refresh, it now says bonjour. So you can see that is a quick and easy way to actually set up each of these constants. So in our page, we would literally just tell it to echo hello. If you're wondering how we would actually incorporate that, you would have, for example, in your regular PHP, you would have your HTML tag, your body tag, call it a P tag, and then we would go, hello, my name is Steve, P, and then body, my Y key likes to stick, and HTML. So we know that this would show a page that just says, hello, my name is Steve. Now what we would do is, instead of having this, we would delete that hello, and we would create a PHP tag here. And this is where we put echo hello. And this would actually output, so this would convert to whatever our hello is. So whether it's that or that. Now in order to get this, we have to include this PHP code into our page. And this would have to be done before the body. So PHP code is always executed either in the header or before. So before we get to the body tag, this needs to be executed. Very important to note. All right. So all of that said and done, we are now going to look at the next part, which is the most relevant for creating our actual login, and we are going to talk about super globals. So globals are a list of variables that are kind of pre-assigned. We can create globals. Basically, it's talking about the scope. So where we had that last example where we were using that constant, in order to get that to view on all of our pages, it would have to be set as a global. And PHP has certain preset globals, or sorry, super globals, which no matter what will always work on any page. They are server, request, post, get, files, env for environment, cookie, and session. The ones that we are going to be concerned with are post, get, and cookie. Might possibly get into files and or server, but likely not. At least not anytime soon. So the first ones we want to go over are post and get. So the super globals, like any other variable, start with the $, and then after that is an underscore, and then the name. So post. For post, get, and the letters are always all caps. So the first thing to understand is that these are arrays. So when we create our form and we submit this, the method is post. Like I said, we could have changed that to get, but we set it as post. So that means on our login page, we want it to be set to post. And then we use the name login name and login pass. So a quick thing, we're going to create a variable called username, which is going to be equal to post login name. And note that that login name is the exact same spelling case as the index. So the case is important. If it was lowercase in the other one, it has to be lowercase here. If it's uppercase, it has to be uppercase. Okay, so our username is equal to post login name. And our password is set to post login pass. Login pass, login name. And semicolon. Okay, so now we're going to simply echo our username dot, and then I'm going to add a break, and then dot password. Spell that right, and with a semicolon. So it's going to echo out our username, then it's going to echo out a break, which should put it onto a new line, and then it's going to echo out password. So save that, go back to our website, and we're going to go to our main page, and we're going to hit our login button and type anything you want here. I'm just going to type test and pass and hit submit. And you can see right here, it knew that our username was test and our password was pass. So we have successfully taken that user information, that user input, and applied it to the server. Now, this can be very, very dangerous because people who are malicious can actually hack your website through these type of forms if they're insecure. So we have to make sure that they are as secure as humanly possible. For example, if we change this from post to get, this information can now be taken from the URL because get works via the URL as well as through form submission. So if I put a question mark, login name is equal to you got hacked, and you notice there you got hacked. Right? Now that's just simple text, but this could be replaced with actual code, which would then overwrite your code. This is common for what's called SQL injection attacks, which is basically ways that hackers will try to access your database by injecting code into your forms. So the other thing is, if you're logging in using get, you can do it through the URL, which means that it can be exposed to view, and that is just a really insecure way of doing things, and it's easy to kind of hijack that. So some don'ts there. But what we want to do is we want to make sure that when we're pulling any information from the user, we want to put it through some filters to make sure that that information is as secure as possible. So switching these back to post. And I'm just going to save that right now. Okay. So this is one way to do it. However, there is a much more convoluted way of doing it. And that is by using the filters, PHP filters, to filter the input. Okay, so one basic way is instead of requesting it like that, I'm going to just comment those out so that we can keep them, but I'm going to create new ones here. So first, our username is equal to filter underscore input and a set of parentheses. So inside, so where we talked about the different functions having a set of parentheses and then a set of curly bracers, different built-in PHP, I want to call them functions, but that's not right. Well, they are functions, but basically they don't use the curly braces. It's just this will apply to whatever's inside there. So I guess these are predefined functions. Yes, that is the best way to describe it. So the filter input, and it's going to ask us for a bunch of different information. So the first one that we need to enter is what we're inputting, which is input underscore post. So the type of input is input post. Then the name of the variable, and then a function that we want to pass to it. So how do we want to filter this? And there is a set list of different ones, and that is available here from W3 Schools. If you go to PHP, scroll down to the bottom, they have under PHP reference, PHP filter, and it will actually show you a list of all the different available ones. So the validates and the sanitize. Validate will basically fail and create a null if it doesn't pass the requirements. Otherwise, if it does pass the requirements, will give you the value therein. Sanitize will basically just do the same thing, but it will actually add stuff as well. Sorry, it's kind of complicated, but for example, filter sanitize URL, whereas validate URL, so filter validate URL versus filter sanitize URL. Filter validate URL will check if it's a valid URL or not. If it's not, it will just pass a null. If it is, it will come in. This one will check if there's any illegal characters. It will remove them if there are, and then pass what's left. So this one kind of forces it to go through, whereas this one is just either it is or it isn't. So if we always want to receive something, that's what we can do. So what we're going to do is filter sanitize string. So filter sanitize string. Note it's all caps and the spaces are underscores. And then we're going to do the same thing with the password. So I'm going to copy and paste that, change this to password, and this to login pass. Okay. And now I'm going to have it just echo our username and password again. Save that. that over, go back to our site, refresh, and test, pass, submit. Note it says test and pass again. However, don't want to save that. If I go test backslash double quote slash HTML, just kind of writing in random characters. For pass, I'm going to use a $sign and then enter the word pass, and I'm going to hit submit. Okay. So as you can see, the only thing it didn't include was that HTML tag. However, while it looks like that's what it passed through, I'm pretty sure what it did is it converted those characters into HTML safe tags, and we're just going to double check that that's what that did. By doing var dumps on R2. So username, password. Okay. Now I went back to get back, but if I go forward, it will preserve what I had typed in for the username and password. And if I refresh, it will just reload this login page. And like I said, it'll preserve our post data so we don't have to worry about retyping it. So as you can see, the quotes, it actually converted to and #34 or ampersands hashtag 34 semicolon. I mentioned before I often call the hashtag a pound. I might sometimes call the ampersands an and because that's what they're commonly used for. I might also call the non-breaking space a no block space, and that is just a misnomer on my part. So if I ever call the ampersands NBSP semicolon a no break space or a no block space, just know that I mean non-breaking space. All right. So, yeah, basically it removed the characters that could cause it issues with other things. Some special characters will be able to pass through, but it won't apply because it is still within the string tags, and that won't have any effect on the string. So that's why the $sign, for example, was allowed to pass, even though we use that in PHP code to represent the beginning of a string. And if you're wondering why I use the backslash, because that's a common escape key for PHP. So, yeah. Anyway, it did all of that. It automatically converted stuff for us. Now, if I'm going to go back to this, and this time I'm going to comment out those and reinstate these so you can see what the difference is. And you notice now it's exactly the same as what was typed in, right? So that's what we're trying to avoid. With PHP, it's not such a big deal, but once we start including the SQL database, that's where that can basically allow people to get full access to our database and wreak havoc on it. So, yes, keep that as secure as humanly possible. All right, so going back in, we're going to just completely delete those two. We're going to uncomment out these two, and we're going to delete those. Okay, so now we've received the username and password, and we need to do something with them. However, we're not quite at that part yet, because that's going to come in with the database, which we haven't actually set up yet, using MySQL. So in the next video, we'll talk about MySQL and setting up database for it, and then connecting this to that. But for the meantime, we're going to do one last thing with our PHP. Actually, a couple. So the first thing, we are going to do something with this, but just the username portion of it, because passwords, we always want passwords to be secure and protected. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a cookie. Set cookie and parentheses. So the first thing is the name of the cookie. So we are going to call this user. The next thing is the value, which is username. So you notice when I want it to just say what I'm actually typing, I don't need to create a string and then save it as that. I can just write it as a string using those single quotes. And then when I want it to be an actual string, so the value of that, I just type in that variable name. Okay. Okay, so the next part is the timeout. So how long this cookie will last before it automatically deletes itself. So this is time. So this is a PHP function that will basically fetch the current time. And then we're going to add 3600, and these are in seconds. So 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. So 3600 is 1 hour. The next is what this applies to as far as the site. So you can have it just for a certain section of the site. If you want it to be all of the site, you simply put a /. So / in brackets. The next set is just an empty set of brackets, then a 1 and a 0. The last three elements, I honestly can't remember what they are for. I know that the one sets it as secure, so it goes over HTTPS instead of HTTP. And I don't remember what those two specifically are. I just know that that one has to be a blank string and this one has to be 0. If you want to look that up, by all means feel free, but all of the cookies that we create will have this part at the end all the same. The only things that we're going to be changing in any of them is that this value is going to be the name of the cookie. If we're using different cookies, this will be the name of the cookie, this will be the value of the cookie, and this will be the expiration time. Those are the only three things that are ever going to change. The rest will always have that at the end. Okay, so we create a cookie with the username that we typed in, and then we're going to create a header function. And in the header function, we're going to use the double quotes instead of single because we want it to execute the function. And we're going to type in location with a capital L, a colon, the dot over dot, space, and the URL of our site. So https:/highway45.ca/. And what this will do is this is what's known as a header redirect. So this will actually redirect us back to our main page. So what will happen is when we submit that form, it will bring up the login.php. It will pull the username and password data, sanitize them using whatever methods they use to sanitize strings. It will create a cookie called user that has the value of our username that will last for 1 hour. And then it will send us back to our main page. So now, typically, if you had more code after this and you were doing kind of an if-then statement, what you would want to do is then also do an exit. However, if it's the very end of your code, you don't need to do that because it will automatically exit. But it is good practice to include that to let it know that the code is finished and it exits out. It won't process anything further down. Okay, so we go back to our page here. We want to make sure we're on the main page. Just refresh that. Click on the login. Type in anything you want for the username and password. I'm just going to do test pass again and hit submit. Okay, and you notice it didn't do anything this time. It just loaded this, and that's because, like I said in the previous video, that page basically loaded all of that information in a matter of microseconds. So it's imperceivable to us on this end. However, we now have a cookie. So if we go right click inspect and go to application, under application there is storage and there's a section called cookies. If you hit the down arrow for that, you'll see your website in there. You click on that and this is our cookie. So the name is user, the value of that cookie is test. It has our domain, the path, the expiration, HTTP only is blank. I think that might be the 0, to be honest. And then secure has a check. That was our 1 that was in there. All right, so we have a cookie there. Now what can we do with that cookie? So we will go back to our index page and between these two, I'm going to create some PHP to execute. So I'm going to use username is set to filter input, because again, everything we do, we want to use the filter input, and our input is going to be input cookie. The name is user, because that is the name of our cookie. And filter sanitize string. So we're going to filter that in case somebody created their own cookie and wanted to throw that in there. And whatever the sanitized version of user is will be set as our username. And then we're going to do an if statement. If username. Now, I'm just going to leave it as that. So you're saying, well, what is it doing? Basically, if you just have the name of a variable, all it's going to do is check if that exists. So basically, the username is set to this. Now, if this fails or if this is blank, if it's any version of null, this doesn't exist, and this will fail. So if anything was saved as that user, this will come up as true and process. If it doesn't, then it won't. So if username, then say hi is equal to hello space dot username semicolon else say hi is equal to, and two single quotes together will create a null value. And the reason why I'm doing this, because I could just say hi is equal to this and then call say hi. But if say hi isn't set, so this failed, then that will actually generate a PHP error because it's saying I'm calling a variable that doesn't exist. So we want it to exist, we just don't want it to have a value. All right. Then we go down to the bottom of our page here, under here, where this page is under construction, and we create more PHP code. And we're going to echo say hi. And I'm going to create a paragraph tag there. There we go. All right. So I save that. And I refresh my page. Hello test. So it recognized that I logged in as test. If I create a new login, let's call it test2, and pass2, submit, boom. Now it saves, it overrode the previous one. It has now test2 as the username, and it's now saying hello test2. So it recognized immediately when I logged in that that cookie had updated. Now if I delete the cookie, you can actually just delete it, and I refresh this, it's gone because that cookie no longer exists. I deleted it, so if it didn't show up, that line doesn't actually write. Whereas if I log in again and use my actual name and just pass for a password, hello Brian, right? So it now knows who I am. However, we don't actually want that in our final site, so we're going to go back and just delete all that. So delete that PHP and delete this PHP. That gives you an example of how we incorporate PHP into our site. All right, so this we will just leave all of that. But before we go, we're going to use this piece to fill out our index.phps from the other sections. So we have 3 one for each folder, the CSS folder, the image folder, and the JavaScript folder. We have these blank index.php files. So we're going to go into one, and just on one line, PHP header double quotes location colon https colon double slash highway45.ca slash, and then after the semicolon here, I'm going to give a double slash and redirect to main page. So it just little line of code that tells me what that does. And I'm going to copy that. I'm going to save that, close that page, and now I can just paste this code and save into each of my other files. Paste, save, close. All right. So now when we go back, close that out. If I go in here and I type in /CSS and hit enter, it just brings me back to the main page. No more white empty pages. So that is some basic PHP, going into a little bit more intermediate PHP, and we will continue with the next episode, actually creating a database and setting that up. All right. Until then.